Yeah, good morning, everybody. It really is a pleasure to be here today. And like Ross said in the beginning, who's not here? Everybody is here from the Zooarch world. So well done to the organizers for this really nice initiative. So my job here today is to introduce Professor Umberto Albarella, who doesn't really need an introduction, but here he goes. So here is my pleasure and an honor to introduce Umberto, who is one of the leading voices of contemporary zooarchaeology today. And Umberto, as you all know, is a professor of zooarchaeology at the University of Sheffield, where he has built an amazing research environment, who I believe we all benefit from the sidelines. And somehow we ended up doing a presentation in there now and then, eventually. And at the University of Sheffield, he has been training generations of students who are now shaping the new zooarch world. Over more than 3 decades, his work has been fundamental in advancing how we understand human-animal relationships in the past and also in the present, I believe, from domestication and changing husbandry practices to ritual and symbolic uses of animals, patterns of exploitation in Roman and medieval societies, and also a lot of osteometry, which we all like very much. What really sets his scholarship apart is the way it combines very meticulous faunal analysis with big interdisciplinary questions spanning from anthropology, history, and environmental research. He has published extensively, and we all know his papers. And we also know that Umberto has been helping to build this international zooarchaeological community, not only serving as a general secretary of ICAS, but also by founding and co-moderating the Zooarch list that we all love and use on a regular basis, I would say. At least I know I do. And it's definitely a crucial space for all zooarchaeologists and global exchange. Umberto has also been an important advocate for equity, inclusivity, and collaboration, and we can only thank you for that, Umberto. So, so here we are very grateful to have you here, Umberto, today, to joining this inaugural MED-Zooarch Symposium, the first of many, we hope. So we can all welcome you today and your keynote lecture, Mare Nostrum, Pursuing Zooarchaeology in a World in Turmoil. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the meeting today.
Thank you, Mariana, for this lovely introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here and to see so many friends. And it's pity in a way that we can't be in person, but at the same time, in the fact we are online, allows more of us to be together. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to give this introduction to the conference. So I'll share my screen and we get going. Is that all right? Yeah. Okay.
I think so. See.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, so I'm ready to go. Okay. Right. The main point of my introduction to the conference is to focus our attention on our responsibility, not just as zooarchaeologists, as researchers, but also as citizens, as human beings who are part of this world, responsibility towards the world around us, and also trying to make the point that our responsibility as citizens is not separated from our responsibility as researchers. Because we are focusing on the Mediterranean, I have called this introduction Mare Nostrum, which, as everybody will know, is the name that the ancient Romans gave to the Mediterranean. I think one of the reasons why I decided to call it Mare Nostrum is to remind us that the Romans called the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum because they were an imperial force. And basically, they wanted to state that the sea was theirs rather than belonging to others. And because we are currently, sadly, living kind of a new imperial era in terms of the attitude many countries have towards the rest of the world, I think that could be, you know, relevant to the modern world. But at the same time, but wait for that to the end of my presentation, I think we can give to this concept of Mare Nostrum a different interpretation, and one that is more inclusive. Okay. The problem that we have as zooarchaeologists is that we live in a world that is, it's more and more problematic. Well, the world has always been problematic, but we are certainly living a particularly troubled era. I mean, if we look at just at the Mediterranean, it is very well known. I don't know if I move my mouse, can you see it? Probably not. Can you see if I'm trying to point? Can you
No,
see any?
we can't.
Sorry?
We can't see your mouse.
Okay, never mind. It doesn't matter the pointing. I will just mention things as they come. Basically, what you see, we see today in the Mediterranean is that it has become an area where people travel, sometimes in desperate situations. It has become a graveyard for many people trying to leave their countries, which are devastated by wars, by the terrible effects of climate change. So if you look at that photograph with the fires there, it could at the same time symbolize war, which is affecting many of the Mediterranean shores, in some cases with absolutely devastating effects, but also the wood fires that have become increasingly common because of the very poor way in which we have dealt with this planet. Okay, so in this context, as zooarchaeologists, as researchers, as academics, what is our role? There is a tendency, and I would say almost an expectation from the powers that be, that we just keep our work, specific to our detailed tasks, and that we don't look at the wider horizon. Basically, there is a tendency to respond to all these problems in a way that can be exemplified by the next slide. Okay. Can you see the next slide? Did it move?
Yes, Umberto, it did.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just double checking because I can't see you. So I can only see my presentation. Okay, so basically, there is sometimes a tendency to say, okay, academics, researchers don't need to get involved with all this. We just carry on playing with our bones, playing with our data, and don't worry about all the rest. That we only have to look at history to realize how devastating this kind of attitude has been, and how this silence has actually allowed terrible crimes in the history of humanity to occur. I am proud to belong, as I think as some of the introductions already alluded to, certainly Abu did. I'm proud to belong to a community of researchers who have never looked the other way. Okay, the zooarchaeologists are often seen as a kind of model community of people with all the problems that we certainly have. Who doesn't have problems? You know, but we certainly have problems, but we are seen as a community which is functioning well and is taking its responsibilities seriously. Just to give you an example, even if we look at the beginning of our main international organization, which is ICAZ, the International Council of Archaeozoology. Now, ICAZ was born at the beginning of the 70s, and it was a time when the world was in the latter part of the Cold War between the Eastern and the Western Bloc. And especially Europe was divided by the so-called Iron Curtain, which basically also created a massive research problem because there wasn't the kind of exchange that we would have wanted between people based in different countries. ICATS was very aware, the archaeologists were very well aware of that, and they tried to tackle this problem by creating this organization that would involve people from both the East and the West. And if you look at the early conferences, 1971, organized in Budapest, which was part of the Eastern Bloc, moving to 74 in the Netherlands in the West, back in the East in 1978, and back in the West in 1982. Of course, you will see that at the beginning were rather Eurocentric, which is an issue that in following years ICAS has tried to address. But I hope you will agree that it was admirable that the zooarchaeologists were making a very distinct effort to create bridges between the East and the West. And they did it because they had awareness of a delicate political situation. I mean, one of my most wonderful experiences as a zooarchaeologist was to be in London in 1991. It was my very first year in the UK. And in 1991, the zooarchaeology community in London welcomed two eminent zooarchaeologists coming from Eastern Germany, Hans Hermann Müller and Manfred Teichert, who came to visit. And it was very moving because it was the very first time that they had had an opportunity to visit Western countries. And the whole British archaeology community gathered in London to welcome them and to try to have a research exchange with them. It was a wonderful example of a collaboration and basically, you know, try to shake hands with people who were divided by political borders, for which we had very little interest. Of course, in following years, ICATS and the zooarchaeology community more in general had to deal with many other issues concerning the current situation in the world. And certainly, I don't have to tell you, you will know it perfectly well, that we operate in a very unequal world in which there are very different opportunities according to where you happen to be born. And there is a profound injustice about this, and something that as researchers need to deal with, because like in the past, in divide between the East and West, nowadays there is no reason why we shouldn't want to communicate in equal way with people coming from Canada, from Belgium, or from China, or from Madagascar, or wherever. And again, I think the zooarchaeology community has been good at trying to create a global zooarchaeology. So a zooarchaeology which is really worldwide and where people can communicate as much as they can exchange, and can also support each other. ICATS, going back to ICATS, ICATS has had many initiatives that have trying to readdress the issue inequality. Of course, we'll never get where we would like to be because we can't solve all the world problems, but we certainly can be aware of them and try to address them as much as we can. For instance, take initiatives like, for instance, offering IGAS memberships to students and also other researchers working in countries from the developing world, from the majority world, and many others. If you only look at the composition of international committee of ICATS, you will see that we're dealing with a truly global organization. And there have been many other initiatives. I like to mention PIZZA for the students, which is a wonderful international organization affiliated with ICATS. And Mariana mentioned Zooarch. One of the reasons why I'm proud that Jackie Melville and I created Zooarch is because Zooarch has been a place of freedom and a place of exchange and a place of support and a place of communication. Okay, it's free, and people have felt rather comfortable about that. We have now had it for 25 years, and I think it has contributed very much to the developing of zooarchaeology in as equal a way as it was possible. Well, of course, challenges carry on coming, and there is no point in trying to ignore them. Just as an example of some debate that happened to be quite fierce, for instance, in some cases, you end up having organizing conferences in countries that generate problems in providing visas for people coming from other countries. It's a problem that has been occurring on a regular basis and is very much present in today's world. I mean, for instance, there was a great, massive debate when the ASWA conference, so this is the ICATS working group for Southwestern Asia, was organized in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, where it was difficult for people from some nationalities to go. But what was the reaction of the archaeology community? We didn't stick our head in the sand. There was a robust debate, partly on Zooarch, partly on the ICATS newsletter. ICATS intervened and tried to find solutions. And for instance, a following conference was organized in Israel, which again provided other problems because, some people either couldn't or didn't want to go to Israel, but it did compensate in terms of trying, okay, we can't resolve the problem of the visas altogether, but what we can try to do is to try to have conferences spread all over the world. So at least some people will be able to go to some of them. So we didn't ignore the issue. We just debated. We even fought. We even argued. But, the issue was there and we were prepared to tackle it head on. Again, various issues in which the archaeology community had to intervene. Just to give one of the many examples, for instance, a few years ago in Brazil, we had a government which was very much nostalgic of the military dictatorship. But even if we move away from the ideological aspects, but our colleagues in Brazil were warning us that there was a brutal attack by this government against indigenous community, which is, of course, of high relevance for zooarchaeologists who work through ethnoarchaeology, but also have learned so much historically from the life of the people of the world today, and they don't want their culture and their traditions to be destroyed. And also a massive attack on generally on heritage or museums, universities, and so on. It's a story that, as we will see again, is happening today big times. And again, we wrote letters of support for our Brazilian colleagues. ICATS made a very strong statement. Okay, this you might say, okay, it didn't change anything, but for colleagues who are in those situations, to feel that they are not isolated, to feel the sense of the international solidarity is important, is very important. And which leads me to an example that I am very familiar with, and many people who are here will know about because it has absorbed my life now for the last 5 years or so, 5, 6 years. Is that, for instance, when there was the brutal attack by the University of Sheffield management on our department, that eventually led to the closure of the Department of Archaeology in Sheffield. I mean, the reaction of the archaeology community was amazing. We were fighting a very, very difficult battle. And some people might say that we lost it because the department was closed. But I think that we were always a winner in that battle. First, because when you fight injustice, you are always a winner. You fight injustice because that's the decent thing to do, regardless of the results. The second is because we achieve some results. For instance, we saved the jobs, although we didn't save the department. I think most importantly of all, we gave an example of the fact that the international community could raise together, could come together, could come to the help and the rescue of some people who were in trouble. We got, I mean, the vice chancellor received more than 2,000 letters of complaint. And okay, these were not all zooarchaeologists, of course they weren't, but the zooarchaeology community was there at the forefront. And we felt, for instance, the support of ICATS also in that case. So basically, we realized that we were fighting a battle not just for our department, but as the title of one of the rallies we organized, it was really a fight against cultural vandalism, okay, which was a widespread phenomenon. And it is today one of the reality of the world in which we live. The fact that the University of Sheffield situation was far from an isolated case is demonstrated by a number of different political tendencies. And you don't have to go much further than look at the world of the current US Vice President J.D. Vance. Okay, this is a speech he gave before becoming Vice President, but I don't think his opinion has changed. I mean, if you search for it on Google, you will find it. And although, I mean, maybe like me, you may not enjoy hearing J.D. Vance speaking, but it's actually quite education to hear him saying the universities are our enemy. And he goes further to say it is our duty to attack them. Ironically, J.D. Vance is right, in the sense that the powers that he represents see culture, see knowledge, see education as a threat. Let's be honest, the current American leadership wouldn't be not in that place if the level of education in that country had been higher. But this is just an example because it can be applied to so many other parts of the world. And there is a link between, the threat to many institutions around the world, the very closure of my own department, and this political trend that we see spreading more and more. And it's a situation that really we cannot afford to ignore. Going back to the specifics of zooarchaeology, I think this current climate also means that many of our collections, many of our museums, and a lot of our research, to be honest with you, are at risk. Okay, there is a tendency more and more, especially addressed towards morphological analysis. And you know, you are all archaeologists here. You have all faced the problem that the zooarchaeology collections are bulky. They take space. Bones can be big. Okay, we don't only deal with mouse bones, but we also deal with elephant bones. And even if you deal with cow bones, they're not tiny. They occupy space, and people don't like that. They, you know, quite often managements that are completely in the pockets of the powers that be just to see this just as a waste of room. What's the point of all this? We have gone beyond understanding of evidence, understanding of knowledge. Today, more and more, and the whole craze about the artificial intelligence is an example of that. We tend to live more and more in a world which is fictional, and therefore the attempt to look at the reality of the world is becoming more and more old-fashioned and something that politically needs to be avoided. So in archaeology, this situation has also led us to face another dilemma. 16 years ago, we had an absolutely wonderful conference in Paris. I think it was the best attended IGES conference. Jean Denis, who is here, was one of the main organizers. And in that occasion, it's a long time ago, but I don't think things have changed much. I had the opportunity to give this talk, which I entitled "One Step Forward, Two Steps Back: Archaeology, DNA, and the Infantilization of Research." What I was trying to do in this talk, I wanted to lament a situation which had a wonderful and very positive, and very constructive opportunity that biomolecular archaeology is giving to us nowadays, also have the downside that in some cases they have taken us away from an analysis of real concrete evidence and take us towards an excessive simplification and what I call the infantilization of research. It is our duty as a researcher to make our message as simple as possible so that it can be understood by all. But of course, there is also the risk that we simplify it beyond what is appropriate. And maybe that kind of simplification is also part of a power struggle. It's the struggle to provide a message which is as simple and if you like even as sanitized as possible, so that we can get the big grants, we can go and publish papers in renowned journals, so that in turn will give us that kind of power that money and control can have. Although you might say, well, that's the world in which we live, and in some aspects there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. We hope to some extent part of that system. It's also very important that we didn't become slaves of that system, because that system is part of that very same system that is led to the closure of institutions, that has led to political control, and basically embedded very much into the neoliberal economy, sees research as a way of competing with each other rather than collaborating with each other. And I mentioned the possibility and the sometimes rather cynical attempt to publish at all costs in big journals. But what's the situation that we have with publications? And again, something that as zooarchaeologists we cannot ignore. We provide the papers and the research to these journals for free, journals that by and large are owned by big business, okay, big and wealthy business. And so we write for them, we review for them for free, and then we have to pay for what we want to read. And what is even worse is that nowadays, especially with the whole issue of open access, which has become quite fundamental in order to spread that information with paper and hard copies becoming a rarity, really. Everybody looks at things online. And so open access becoming the key thing in order to get exposure in your work. And this has become a very expensive business and something that only some people can afford, and therefore is increasing that kind of inequality that as zooarchaeologists we have always tried to compensate. So there is a lot of food for thought there. Okay, it gets worse. The situation in the world is getting really hot and dangerous. We have, if we look at the Mediterranean, we have to look no further than Gaza, where, according to the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, there is genocide taking place in Palestine. And look at the situation in Iran, where thousands of protesters are brutally killed. Or indeed in the USA, where it's in the news, has been in the news big time since the beginning of the year. The fact that basically the president seems to have its own almost private militia that seems to be able to kill people in cold blood just for being bystanders. So people are just filming what they're saying. I think the time has come for us to consider the possibility of removing ourselves from our associations with governments that are more and more corrupt, more and more violent, more and more oppressive, and start thinking about organizing conferences in which affiliations to our institutions, which are often complicit with some of these horrible things happening in the world, should be removed. And it's something that really we would have to consider in the past. You might find all these issues unpleasant and something that it's better not to look at, but there is no way. If you try to look the other way, the reality will catch up with you. This has happened recently with our friends. Many of you here will be members of the European Association of Archaeologists, and many of you will be aware of the fact that there has been a massive controversy, and I won't go into the details of that, but basically in which the leadership of the EAA, rather than dealing with the problems that the current political situation was raising, try to ignore them or try to operate in an inconsistent and non-transparent way, to the point of breaking really the organization and splitting it. And some groups like the Black Trowel Collective or the Archaeology Against Apartheid are now calling for a boycott of the next conference of the EAA in Athens in 2026, so later this year. It's an unpleasant situation. I don't know if the EAA is going to survive from this, but what I would not like is for zooarchaeology organizations to make the same mistakes. Now, it's not a question of taking an ideological stand one way or another, but it's simply a question of acknowledging the current problems that we have and try to discuss them clearly, honestly, and openly together so that we can find solutions. And that is not what has happened with EAA. I just want to go back to the Mare Nostrum point. Okay, as I said, the name Mare Nostrum has got imperial connotations from ancient world. But what prevents us from looking at this in a different way? And just looking, I come from Naples in southern Italy on the shores of the Mediterranean. I look at that sea and I think sea is mine. I belong here. This is where I grew up. And but I don't want to be mine at the expense of others. I would like to see a Mediterranean in which, as citizens and researchers, we encourage a world in which people do not have to be expelled or sent away or ethnically cleansed from the areas where they live. And also, we want a Mediterranean and a sea where people coming from other countries, leaving other countries because ravaged by war or ravaged by the terrible effects of climate change, are welcomed rather than rejected by countries on different shores of that same sea. It's a sea that belongs to all of us, and it would be nice to see it as a broad community. I would like to finish this introduction with summing up some of the key points that I think could make something that I call a manifesto for the responsible zooarchaeologist. I think what is key is when we face injustice, we should never look the other way. It's never going to work. It's always going to catch up with us if we try. We shouldn't pretend that politics doesn't concern the researchers. Even the indifference to politics is a political act and not something that we should be proud of. And history should teach us several lessons of how we regard nowadays researchers and academics who have decided to ignore the worst brutalities happening in the world. When we work, we should always think that there are probably colleagues that have less than we have, and what we can do to support and help them. We have to be aware of the political context in which we operate and the fact that there is a pressure to diminish and destroy knowledge. And it is our responsibility to work against this new wave of cultural vandalism. It's very important that we take our responsibilities seriously. When we work, we should think about the effects of our work. Does it hurt others? Does it hurt the planet? For instance, what is that sponsor that we have been lucky to have? Is it ethical? What do they do? Do they support people? Do they contribute to the slaughter of people or the slaughter of the planet? Or that project in which we have been involved? And so on and so forth. It's important that we carry on asking ourselves those questions and be prepared to say no sometimes, even if maybe saying yes could be useful for our careers. And then, to accept and understand that the world is indeed in turmoil, and it's absolutely important that we have to give our contribution to save it. And in other words, to try to be part of the solutions rather than being resigned to the fact that we inevitably are part of the problem. Okay, so I would like to thank you, Abu, Claudia, Rafael, and Ross, and everybody here for the invitation, for putting together this amazing program. I was very chuffed to be asked to give this introductory talk. and it's lovely to be with you all. I just wanted to remind you once again, as you know, while Abu put it very clearly and very nicely in his introduction, we are a whole community, and we can create a better world, but without the need to wait for some kind of utopian future. The opportunities exist now, okay? And we can create areas of freedom and collaboration, solidarity, without waiting for a hypothetical future. So our opportunities exist now, and I hope that this conference contributes to these kind of ethos, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the conference. I almost wish that I was prepared to apologize for giving you a talk which is political more than archaeological, but in fact I won't apologize. I think it's absolutely needed that today we have an awareness of the context in which we operate, and that will really determine the future and dictate the future of our discipline. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Umberto. That was really nice and thought-provoking. We have 10 minutes for a short discussion. So if you can do Bart. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, this is Laszlo Bartoszewicz. That's just a short thing. And I just want to thank Umberto for this really good presentation. I think, yes, you cannot avoid politics, even if you would love to, but unfortunately, this is how life is. And I would like to shortly reflect on two examples you brought, because I see some connection in here. And then I will draw my own conclusion about this. Thank you for pointing out the 9th and 11th ASWA example, where there was one meeting in the United Arab Emirates and then the next one in Israel, trying to balance and compensate. And I happened to be president of ICAS at the time, and I know this is a really serious debate, and thanks to the sober minds, and Richard Meadow was at the forefront of it, and yes, some people from Israel, like Danny Bar Yosef and everybody, who just said, come on, calm down. This is not about politics. We can compromise amongst each other. And I think that kind of solidarity is very, very important. I would add that point to the manifesto. It is the reward young scholars will get that Abu was asking. What is the reward in belonging to this community? Our reward is, I think, that type of solidarity. And then when I compare that situation with EAA, which is, I think, in a crisis now, yeah, it's very difficult, but if we refer to people like Donald Trump, who is very eager to split international organizations, I mean, it's very clearly, whether you speak of the UN, WHO, NATO, whatever, cooperation is the enemy of this kind of hegemons. And I think, unfortunately, the very contentious issue at Gaza, where you can throw arguments that is genocide, then anti-Semitism from the other side. And so it's a lot more toxic situation, not only for the poor people who suffer on location, but it's a perfect propaganda weapon to divide communities. And in EAA, this was the issue as well. And then they were really not very good at facing it up front. But I think back then, when we had the ASWA discussion, it was a lot more muted and balanced version. And within ICAS, there was an, if I may call it, intelligence attitude to the whole thing, and then a compromise could be reached. And we agreed. The meeting in between the 10th ASWA meeting was held in Belgium as a neutral ground, so everybody could come. And then the idea was that sometimes one half of the community cannot come, and next time the other half. So I think that is very important, trying to, yes, as Umberto perfectly, correctly pointed out, to face these challenges upfront. And then the next step is trying to minimize damage. And we just had a small webinar of our other group, Mare Nostrum. This is the Baltic archaeozoology group. And I must say that all countries were represented, but Russia was missing. Russia was not excluded. Russia is not part of the picture, unfortunately. And in the current political situation, it would be sort of difficult to argue Russia as a whole, Vladimir Putin as a whole. But our colleagues who work in Russia, and I'm happy to see them on Zooarch, they are not Putin, the Israelis are not Netanyahu, the Americans are not Trump, and Hungarians are not Orban, if I may speak for myself. So, and I think that is very important to keep in mind when we communicate with each other and we think of organizing things and stand up for each other. As I mean, Umberto, thank you once again for the marvelous speech and the very, very good examples. Not only the ones I pointed out, but I think your speech was really thought-provoking and emotionally very pleasing to me, at least. Well, thank you very much. And thanks for the organization anyway. I mean, this is a step forward to keeping the community together. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Laszlo. I think we have one more question in line, and then maybe Umberto, you can answer the two questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
Anthony?
If I can just say a few words, it would be for thanking Umberto for his presentation. In my opinion, it's really important that we have this kind of approach, which is not only a scientific, factual, technological approach, which is also important, but which is speaking about the marrow of the bones. If I translate what probably a lot of you know from François Rabelais, 16th century, which is the substantifique moelle in French. Thank you very much, Umberto. Thank you, Laszlo, for the word that you had. But I didn't want to comment about that because it's so perfect. But I just wanted to emphasize one important point, in my opinion, is that there is actually a continuity in the generations, in this philosophy, in this way to consider the world. And I am really stricken by the age, if I can say that, around the screen. We have a lot of young people. We are just a small number of old one of the old generation, and I see that there is really a continuity in this. I already mentioned this during the last ICAS committee meeting in Portugal last June. I am so happy to see that there is more and more young scientists involved in this work, but also in this reflection and in this fight, because this is a fight that we have to conduct again and again for the next years. So thank you very much to you, Umberto, and thanks to the organizers of this meeting again.
Thank you so much, Jean-Denis. Umberto.
Marianne, do you want to go to Abu and then I answer the three questions together?
Fair enough. A quick one, Abu, so we can keep the schedule, please.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I was very much influenced and very much affected by Umberto's talk, the way he expressed his lecture, and that was our motto, and we are like fighting for now. So I wanted to express our gratitude that we are super lucky that you people, Umberto, Jean-Denis, and also Arturo, people like you, Alice. So you put a solid foundation of zooarchaeology across Mediterranean, and onto that foundation we are now. And don't worry, we are strong, and we will be stronger. And we are in the same path, the open science, not polluted by this so-called, let's say, the capitalist machine. But I wanted to express, like, I 100% agree with you. Like, I think from my studentship, like from my early age also, the job of archaeology or like a social scientist or the is like direct people. They give the direction to the humanity or community. So, like producing a lot of data sets is not our final job. Our final job is to address the issues, direct the society we are living in. That is actually the real message I got from Umberto. So it's like ancient prophet who are guiding people in their darkness. So this is the job we are up to. And thank you, Umberto, for guiding us. Keep us guiding, please. Thank you.
Okay, Marianne, shall I quickly? Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, thanks to Abo and Janine for their comments, kind comments. There were no questions there. So I think there was, and also thanks, Laszlo. You know, I agree with everything you said, really. And I think one point that you put is worth just a very quick further consideration is the fact that, you know, mentioning the example of the EAA, obviously it's very lamentable that there is even a discussion that there could be a split within the organization, you know. I think problems should be solved through conversation and communication. The problem is that sometimes, and we just have to accept that this is the case, we all have red lines. Okay, so we all decide that as much as we compromise, we won't go towards beyond a certain point. So, for instance, in this conference, we wouldn't accept somebody who comes here and give a talk which is openly racist, would we? Okay, we wouldn't want that to happen. I think we have a red line there. And I think with the EAAs, this is what has been happening. I think what is lamentable there is not the ideological divide, because the ideological divide is inevitable. In any organizations, you will have people who think differently. But there must be a willingness to get together and to discuss the problems. And Laszlo, as I gave the example of what we happened with Aswa, and Laszlo has picked up on that. It's a classic case of how to try to address an awkward problem. Okay, and we managed to do it. But why we managed to do it? Because we decided to do it openly without resorting to dirty and untransparent strategies. I'm afraid this is not what has happened with the EAA, where, you know, rather dirty strategies have been used and that have been aimed to prevent communication rather than encourage communication. And when these things happen, I'm afraid, as much as you would want to be a nice guy, a nice person who is always prepared to talk, you know, sometimes you just have to face the reality that the divide, the gulf is only too big. Talking about archaeology, let's remember what happened with the split of the World Archaeological Congresses that were split around the issue of South African apartheid. But it's the pressure of academic institutions towards a racist South Africa that eventually helped to make that government, that power collapse. But you know, in that respect, I don't regret that particular split that occurred in some cases. I wouldn't want to share my platform with Nazis and racists, for instance, just to give an example. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Umberto. Abu.